Richard Halley was a man the world both feared and admired. CEO of a billion-dollar company, he was the type of man who could silence a boardroom with a single look. But at home, in his penthouse above the glittering city, there was one silence he could never break: his daughters. Emily Halley was 8 years old, delicate like porcelain, with big round eyes that seemed to hold every word she never spoke. Doctors called it selective mutism. Therapists tried, specialists came and went, but no one had ever heard her utter a single word, not her teachers, not her caretakers, not even Richard himself. For years, Richard buried himself in work. Deals, conferences, mergers. It was easier to stare at numbers than to confront the hollow ache inside his home. But one evening, when he walked past Emily's room and found her sitting by the window, hugging her teddy bear with tears streaming down her cheeks, something inside him broke. The next morning, he made a decision no advisor or doctor could have predicted. "Cancel my meetings," he told his assistant, "clear my schedule. Today, I'm taking Emily to the park." The chauffeur was stunned when Richard himself opened the car door for his daughter. Emily looked at him, clutching her teddy tighter, uncertain of this sudden change. But Richard offered his hand not as a CEO, not as a man used to power, but as a father who desperately wanted to connect. Slowly, she placed her tiny fingers in his. The city park was alive with laughter. Children ran barefoot across the grass, their shrieks of joy echoing through the air. Parents chatted on benches, balloons bobbed above little hands, and the smell of roasted chestnuts drifted in the breeze. It was a world so ordinary, yet so foreign to Emily, who had spent most of her childhood behind high walls and private tutors. Richard guided her to the playground. He felt awkward, almost out of place, his tailored suit standing out among the relaxed families. Emily clung to him, silent as always, her wide eyes scanning the playground as if unsure whether she belonged. Then it happened. A boy, perhaps her age, with messy hair and clothes too small for him, ran across the playground and stumbled right in front of Emily. He looked up at her and grinned, a tooth missing from his smile. "Hi," he said cheerfully, as if they'd been friends forever. Emily froze, her lips parted slightly as though something stirred within her. Richard noticed instantly, his chest tightening. The boy didn't seem to mind her silence. He simply held out a small, worn marble. "Want to play?" he asked. And in that instant, Richard swore he saw something change in his daughter's eyes. Like a door that had been locked for years had just been nudged open. She looked at the boy, her lips trembled. Richard leaned in, his pulse racing. And for the first time in her life, Emily made a sound. The following Saturday, Richard kept his word. For the first time in years, he cleared his schedule before noon and drove Emily to the city's central playground. The sun was bright, the air carried the laughter of dozens of children, and Richard's heart pounded as he parked his black luxury car near the park's entrance. Emily clutched her small stuffed bunny, her eyes wide with uncertainty as she saw the playground filled with running children. She pressed closer to her father's side, gripping his hand tightly. Richard bent down and whispered gently, "Don't worry, Emily. I'll stay right here with you." He guided her toward the swings, but Emily only stood silently, staring at the other children. Her lips pressed together, her body stiff, and Richard felt the familiar ache of helplessness in his chest. He wanted her to laugh, to shout, to be free like the other kids, but she only watched. That was when Richard noticed a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing at the edge of the playground. His clothes were simple and slightly worn, his sneakers scuffed, but his eyes shone with energy and kindness. Unlike the other kids who played in noisy groups, this boy seemed content to sit on the sandbox edge, building shapes in the sand with his bare hands. Emily's gaze lingered on him. It was subtle, but Richard noticed the way her grip on his hand loosened. Curious, Richard crouched down and asked softly, "Do you want to go there, Emily?" She didn't answer, of course, but she didn't look away either. Taking that as a silent yes, Richard led her toward the sandbox. The boy looked up as they approached, brushing sand off his hands. He gave a wide, genuine smile, not the kind Richard often saw at business galas, where people smiled only to gain something. This boy's smile was simple, warm, and real. "Hi," the boy greeted cheerfully. I'm Daniel. Do you want to build something with me? Emily froze. Richard felt his heart sink. He expected her to turn away like she always did. But instead, she stared at Daniel with wide eyes, as if trying to understand his words. Daniel didn't rush her. He simply picked up a small plastic shovel and began digging, humming softly to himself. I'm building a castle. Want to help? He asked again, not even looking up this time, giving Emily the space to decide. To Richard's astonishment, Emily slowly let go of his hand. Her tiny feet carried her forward until she sat down quietly beside Daniel. She didn't touch the sand at first, but her eyes followed his every move. Richard stood frozen, hardly daring to breathe. For the first time in years, someone other than him had drawn Emily closer instead of pushing her away. And it wasn't a therapist, a specialist, or a wealthy classmate. It was a poor stranger's son, sitting in a sandbox with dirt on his hands and joy in his heart. And in that moment, Richard felt something shift inside him. Ethan adjusted his tie nervously as he pushed his daughter's wheelchair toward the neighborhood playground. It wasn't his usual environment. Normally, his days were filled with boardrooms, contracts, and numbers, but today was different. Today, he was just a father, hoping that a little sunshine and laughter might reach his daughter where medicine and therapy had failed. Layla's big eyes scanned the open space. Children ran across the grass, squealing with joy, climbing monkey bars and racing each other down slides. For a moment, Ethan feared this might overwhelm her. She usually tensed up in crowds, retreating further into her silence. But instead, her small hand clutched the armrest tightly, her gaze fixed on the swings. Ethan knelt down beside her. You want to try? He asked softly. She didn't reply, of course. She never did. But her eyes glimmered faintly, and that was all he needed. With gentle effort, he lifted her from the chair and placed her on the swing. He pushed carefully, letting her feel the rhythm of the air brushing past her cheeks. For the first time in weeks, he saw a flicker of something close to a smile tug at her lips. It warmed his heart. That was when a boy appeared. He couldn't have been older than 7. His clothes were simple worn jeans, a faded t-shirt, but his energy radiated brighter than anyone else's on the playground. He marched straight up to Layla with the fearless curiosity only children possess. Hi, he said brightly, standing in front of her swing. I'm Noah. What's your name? Ethan stiffened. His instinct was to intervene, to explain quickly before disappointment set in. He hated watching other kids give up after trying to talk to Layla. But before he could say anything, Noah leaned closer, lowering his voice. It's okay if you don't talk, he whispered kindly. My mom says some kids just need extra time. Layla's eyes widened. Her tiny fingers gripped the swing's chain, and Ethan could feel her whole body trembling, not with fear, but with something else. Noah grinned and sat on the swing beside her. Want to play a game? It's called Point and Find. You point at something and I'll find it. Layla blinked at him, then slowly raised her hand toward the sandbox. Noah jumped off his swing without hesitation, ran, scooped up a small red shovel, and brought it back. See, I found it, he said proudly. And then it happened. Ethan's breath caught in his chest as he heard the faintest whisper escape his daughter's lips. Shovel. The sound was fragile, trembling, but it was real. Her first word. Ethan froze, his world spinning. Tears stung his eyes as he looked at his daughter in shock and disbelief. After years of silence, after endless therapy sessions and sleepless nights, it wasn't him or the specialists or even the expensive treatments that broke through to her. It was a poor stranger's son. The next Saturday morning, Daniel decided to take Lily to the city's community playground. It wasn't a place he normally visited. He was used to private parks, indoor playrooms, or spaces designed for wealthy families like his. But something inside him told him that Lily needed more than silence and expensive toys. She needed life, laughter, and other children around her. The playground was crowded with children from different backgrounds. Some wore designer jackets, others simple clothes that looked worn but clean. The air was filled with the sound of laughter, the creak of swings, and the clatter of small shoes running across the pavement. Lily clung tightly to her father's hand, her eyes wide but curious. Daniel bent down. It's okay, sweetheart, he he whispered gently. "We're just here to play. You don't have to say anything." He kissed her forehead and led her toward the sandbox. Children ran past them, chasing a ball. Others were climbing the jungle gym, their laughter echoing across the park. Daniel felt out of place at first, a sharp contrast in his crisp tailored suit and expensive leather shoes, but he forced himself to focus only on Lily. "Do you want to try the swing?" he asked softly, but Lily just looked at him, silent as ever, her small hand tightening around his finger. As Daniel lifted her toward the swing, he noticed a boy nearby, messy brown hair, worn sneakers, and a patched jacket that spoke of a family with little money. The boy was building something in the sandbox, carefully shaping towers out of sand. His hands were dusty, his concentration sharp, as if the whole world outside didn't exist. Lily's eyes lingered on him. Daniel noticed. "Do you want to sit and watch?" he asked, kneeling beside her. For a moment, he thought she wouldn't respond at all. But then, quietly, with the tiniest movement, Lily let go of his hand and walked toward the boy. Daniel froze. It was rare for Lily to approach anyone on her own. Usually she avoided strangers entirely. The boy looked up when Lily sat down next to him. He gave her a small smile. "Hi," he said simply, then returned to shaping the sand tower. "Wanna help?" Lily tilted her head. Her small hands reached for the sand. Slowly, carefully, she began copying what he was doing. The two of them worked in silence, side by side, their heads bent low over the growing sandcastle. Daniel watched, his heart pounding. Something about this moment felt different, something he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, Lily wasn't just watching from the sidelines. She was part of something. Then it happened. The boy handed Lily a small stick, placing it gently in her hand. "Here," he said, "use this for the door." And Daniel heard it. A small voice, soft but clear. "Tea, thank you." The words hung in the air like a miracle. Daniel's eyes widened, his breath caught in his throat. His daughter had just spoken her very first words. And not to him, but to a stranger's poor little boy. The following afternoon, Daniel decided to test fate again. He returned to the same playground, this time a little earlier. His driver was hesitant. "Sir, are you sure?" That boy could have been a coincidence. But Daniel only shook his head. Something deep inside told him this was no coincidence. He held Lily's hand tightly as they entered. Lily's eyes immediately scanned the area, searching. Her small fingers twitched in Daniel's palm. When she spotted the boy barefoot, in worn clothes, pushing a broken toy truck in the dirt, her entire face lit up. She tugged her father's hand with surprising strength, pulling him toward the boy. The boy looked up, his big brown eyes wide and innocent. He smiled at Lily like they were old friends. "Hi," he said gently, kneeling down to her height. "Do you want to play?" Daniel froze. His daughter, who had been silent for 5 long years, nodded. Then, in the softest, most fragile whisper, Lily spoke. "Yes." Daniel's knees nearly buckled. His heart raced, his world spinning. He had to grip the nearby bench to steady himself. His daughter had spoken her first word, clear as day, but not to him. Not to her teachers, not to her doctors. To this poor stranger's son. The boy laughed in joy, handing Lily the broken toy truck. "It's yours," he said. She took it carefully, holding it like treasure. "Thank you," Lily whispered again, her second word. Daniel covered his mouth with trembling hands, his eyes welling with tears. He didn't know whether to cry, to cheer, or to fall to his knees in gratitude. The boy's father, a man in ragged clothes who had been sitting at the far edge of the playground, slowly stood and walked over. His face was weathered, his hands calloused from years of labor. He gave Daniel a respectful nod, though his eyes carried quiet suspicion. "Your daughter," he said softly. "She's very special." Daniel finally found his voice. She spoke. She hasn't spoken in years." His voice cracked, his throat tight. The poor man placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "My boy has that effect on people. He makes them feel safe." Daniel stared at the boy, then at his daughter, who was now giggling for the first time in years as she pushed the truck through the dirt beside her new friend. Something inside Daniel shifted. He realized money, power, and endless doctors hadn't healed his daughter. But this boy had given her back her voice, something priceless. For the first time in years, Daniel, the mighty CEO, felt powerless. And strangely, grateful. Daniel couldn't move. His heart was pounding too hard, his throat too tight to speak. He just stood there, staring at Lily and the boy. They laughed together as if they had known each other forever. Each giggle from Lily was like music he hadn't heard in years. Finally, Daniel turned to the poor man standing beside him. His clothes were patched, shoes worn thin, but his eyes carried dignity, strength. "Sir," Daniel's voice trembled. "Do you know what your son just did? My daughter Lily, she hasn't spoken a single word since she was 3. Not one. Doctors, therapists, medicines. Nothing worked. And now she's talking." The poor man nodded slowly, as if he wasn't surprised. "I've seen it before. My boy has a gift. He can reach hearts others can't." He looked at Daniel, his gaze firm. "But it's not magic. It's love. And maybe your daughter has been waiting for someone to listen, someone who understands her silence." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. He glanced back at Lily, who was now whispering words to the boy, soft, broken, but real. Each word was a miracle. "Your son," Daniel whispered. "He's changed everything." The poor man gave a small smile. "He's all I have. His mother passed when he was very young. Since then, it's been just the two of us. We may not have money, but he's never let me feel poor." Those words pierced Daniel's heart. Here he was, a billionaire, owning skyscrapers, private jets, and companies. And yet, for 5 years, he had been the poorest man alive. In one way, he couldn't hear his daughter's voice. And this man, with nothing but his son, had given Daniel back everything. For the first time in years, Daniel bowed his head. "I don't know how to thank you," he whispered. "But I swear I won't forget this." The poor man shook his head gently. "Don't thank me, thank the children." They found each other. Daniel blinked rapidly, fighting tears. "Then at least tell me your name." The man smiled faintly. "My name is Samuel, and this is my boy Eli." Daniel looked at Eli again. The boy who had restored his daughter's voice. The boy who had given him back hope. He knew, deep down, this was only the beginning. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't rush back to his office. He didn't check his phone. He didn't even think about the pending business deals. All his focus was on the little boy sitting on the garden bench with Lily. Eli's presence was like sunlight breaking through clouds. His laughter was pure, his patience endless. He never pressured Lily to talk. He simply sat with her, drawing shapes in the dirt, making silly faces and waiting. And Lily, she responded, not just with words, but with smiles Daniel thought he would never see again. Every evening, Daniel found himself waiting for Samuel and Eli to arrive at the park. It became a silent ritual. Eli would run to Lily, and the two children would vanish into their own world, playing hide-and-seek, sharing snacks, telling secrets. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Daniel noticed something remarkable. Lily was holding a flower in her tiny hands. She turned to Eli and said softly, "This one's for you." It was clear, gentle, and unbroken. Daniel's chest tightened. He wanted to cry, to scream, to thank God all at once. He turned to Samuel, who was sitting quietly at the edge of the park, his hands folded, his eyes watching the sun with quiet pride. "Do you see this?" Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. She's speaking full sentences." Samuel nodded. "Children heal children in ways adults can't." Eli understands silence. Maybe because he has lived with less, he knows how to give more. Daniel studied Samuel for a moment. His clothes were worn, his hands rough from labor, but his posture carried humility. A man who had nothing yet gave everything. A pang of guilt struck Daniel. He had wealth beyond measure, but what had he truly given Lily? Therapists, hospitals, endless doctors, but not the kind of patience this boy had offered freely. "Samuel," Daniel began carefully, "what do you do for work?" Samuel smiled faintly, almost embarrassed. "Whatever I can. Construction, small repairs, sometimes just carrying loads at the market. Enough to keep us alive." Daniel fell silent. The thought gnawed at him. How could life be so unfair? A man like Samuel, who had raised a son with such kindness and strength, living day to day, while he, Daniel, drowned in abundance, yet couldn't give his daughter the one thing she needed? At that moment, Daniel made a quiet decision. He didn't know how or when, but he would not let Samuel and Eli remain strangers who drifted away after this miracle. They were part of Lily's healing, part of her future, and perhaps part of his own redemption. The following weekend, Daniel couldn't hold back anymore. He watched Lily and Eli chase each other under the oak trees, their laughter filling the air, and realized this fragile bond needed protection. It couldn't just stay in the park. He turned to Samuel. Would you both come to our home for dinner? Samuel blinked in surprise, almost as if Daniel had offered him the world. Mr. Daniel, we don't belong in your kind of house, he said gently. My boy and I were simple. I don't want Lily to feel awkward around us. But Daniel shook his head firmly. This isn't about houses or wealth, it's about Lily. She trusts Eli, and I want to see her smile in her own home again. Please, let me do this. Samuel hesitated, his pride wrestling with his gratitude, but when Eli tugged at his sleeve and whispered, Papa, can we go? The decision was made. That evening, Daniel's mansion felt strangely alive, not because of its size or lights, but because of the sound of two children's laughter echoing through the halls. Lily showed Eli her toys, ones that had been untouched for years. She led him into her room, where dolls sat neatly in boxes. To Daniel's astonishment, she pulled one out, handed it to Eli, and said softly, This one's my favorite. Daniel nearly broke down right there. At the dinner table, Samuel was visibly uncomfortable, shifting in his chair, unsure if he should even touch the fine silverware. Daniel noticed and smiled. Samuel, tonight, this isn't my house. It's our table, please eat with us. Slowly, Samuel relaxed, and as they ate, Daniel learned pieces of his life. Samuel had lost his wife years ago, raising Eli alone. He spoke little of his struggles, but every word revealed a man who had suffered quietly, choosing dignity over pity. Daniel found himself listening more than speaking, a rare thing for him. And for the first time in years, Lily ate without being coaxed. She giggled when Eli made faces, she whispered when he leaned close, and she even looked at Daniel once, smiling shyly. It was small, but to Daniel it was everything. That night, after Samuel and Eli left, Daniel sat by Lily's bed as she drifted off to sleep. She clutched the doll she had given Eli, whispering his name before her eyes closed. Daniel's heart ached. He realized something he hadn't admitted before. He needed Samuel and Eli just as much as Lily did. Not out of charity, not out of pity, but because somehow they had brought his family back to life. The following morning, Daniel barely touched his coffee. His mind wasn't on business or stocks or meetings, it was on Samuel and Eli. All night, Lily had slept peacefully, her soft breath steady, her tiny fingers curled around that doll. Daniel had sat by her longer than usual, watching her calm face, and he knew why. It wasn't the medicine, it wasn't the therapy. It was Eli. And Eli came with Samuel. Daniel drove to the hospital earlier than his usual routine. Samuel was already there, cleaning in the courtyard, sleeves rolled up, sweat glistening on his arms. He looked up, surprised to see Daniel standing there in an expensive suit with a strange determination in his eyes. Samuel, Daniel began, I've been thinking. Samuel set down the bucket and cloth, wiping his hands. About what, sir? Daniel's voice was steady, but his heart pounded. You and Eli, you've changed something in my home. In Lily, she hasn't smiled like that in years. And I realized last night I can't let that go. Samuel looked uneasy. Mr. Daniel, I'm just a hospital worker. My boy, he's just a child. We don't belong in your world. But Daniel stepped closer. This isn't about wealth, it's about family. I want to help you, and in turn I want you both in Lily's life. Samuel narrowed his eyes, uncertain. Help us? How? Daniel took a deep breath. I want to offer you something permanent. Not just visits, not just dinner. I want you and Eli to live with us. In my home. Samuel froze. His lips parted, but no words came out. He stared at Daniel, then at the ground, his chest heaving. "Live with you, Mr. Daniel? Do you know what you're asking?" "I'm a widower, a cleaner. People will talk. They'll call me a charity case. I don't want my son growing up ashamed of his father." Daniel's voice broke. "Samuel, no one could ever call you shameful. You've raised Eli with dignity I can only admire. And as for people talking, let them. Lily needs you. I need you. This isn't charity. This is a chance to heal. Together." For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. He looked toward the children's ward window, where Lily's small hand waved down at Eli, who waved back. Samuel's throat tightened. He turned back to Daniel, voice trembling. "Let me think, sir. This isn't a decision I can make lightly." Daniel nodded, hiding the desperation in his chest. "Of course. Take your time. Just know my home will always be open. For both of you." As Daniel walked away, Samuel stood rooted in place, heart torn. For the first time in years, he wasn't just thinking about survival. He was thinking about what if. And what if was a dangerous, beautiful thing. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the scene in the park, his daughter, Emily, speaking for the very first time. But not to him. Not to her teachers, not even to her therapists. She spoke only to that boy. That poor boy in tattered clothes, whose laughter carried more warmth than any expensive gift Richard had ever bought his daughter. The next morning, Richard instructed his driver to take him to the rundown neighborhood where the boy lived. Emily sat quietly beside him, clutching the teddy bear the boy had given her. When they arrived, the place was nothing like Richard's world. Broken fences, cracked sidewalks, children playing barefoot in the dust. But Emily's eyes lit up. She tugged at her father's sleeve and pointed eagerly. There he was, the boy. His name was Liam. He was sitting outside a small, shabby house, drawing with chalk on the pavement. His clothes were faded, but his smile was as bright as ever. When he saw Emily, he jumped up. "Emmy!" he called, and to Richard's shock, Emily let go of his hand and ran straight to him. "Hi, Liam," she whispered softly. Richard froze again. She spoke. Clearer this time, words flowing naturally, as if she had been speaking all along but chose silence until this boy appeared. Richard's chest tightened. Why him? Why not me? A woman stepped out of the house, a tired-looking lady with kind eyes and worry lines carved deep into her face. She looked surprised to see Richard's expensive car parked by her home. "Can I help you?" she asked cautiously. Richard cleared his throat. "I'm Richard Halley," he said, his voice heavy with authority. "This is my daughter, Emily. Your son seems to have a remarkable effect on her." The woman smiled faintly and placed a protective hand on Liam's shoulder. "My son doesn't have much," she admitted, "but he has a gift. He makes people feel safe." Richard studied her, then looked back at the children. Emily was laughing, actually laughing, as Liam showed her his chalk drawings. It was the sound Richard hadn't heard in years, but there was something in the woman's tone, something that made Richard uneasy. "Tell me," he asked, his voice low, "who exactly is your son?" The woman hesitated. Her eyes flickered with something unspoken pain, maybe even fear. She pressed her lips together before finally answering. "Liam isn't just any boy. He was never supposed to meet your daughter. But now that he has, there's no turning back." Richard's heart skipped. The air around them suddenly felt heavier. "What do you mean?" he demanded. The woman shook her head, her voice trembling. "There's a reason your daughter spoke to him. A reason she never spoke to anyone else. They're connected, Mr. Halley, in ways you wouldn't understand yet." Richard felt the ground shift beneath his feet. He had spent millions searching for answers to Emily's silence. And now, in front of him, a poor boy from the streets held the key. But the question was, what truth was about to be uncovered? The conference room was silent. Reporters, cameras, and investors all waited. Mr. Blackwood, the CEO, was supposed to announce the company's next big expansion. But instead, he was pacing the stage, clutching a photo in his hand. It was a photo of his daughter, Lily, smiling next to Daniel, the poor boy who had changed everything. The crowd whispered, confused, as the screens behind him showed the company logo untouched. He finally spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, for years I thought success was measured in numbers. Profits, towers built, contracts signed, but I was wrong." The hall froze. No one had ever heard the cold, uncheckable CEO sound like this. "My daughter," he continued, voice trembling, "never spoke a word to me. Doctors said she might never speak at all. But one boy, a boy with nothing, gave her something no amount of money could buy. He gave her her voice." Gasps filled the room. Cameras zoomed in, investors exchanged puzzled looks. But he didn't care anymore. "For too long, I've been blind," Mr. Blackwood said, gripping the microphone tighter. "I ignored people like Daniel. Families like his. I lived in glass towers while they lived in shadows. And yet, it was Daniel who healed my child, not the fortune I spent." Whispers spread like wildfire. Some called it weakness. Others called it bravery. But for Mr. Blackwood, it was truth. At that very moment, the doors at the back opened. Daniel and his father stepped in, awkward in the grand, glittering hall. Lily broke free from her nanny's hand and ran straight to Daniel. And then before the eyes of hundreds she spoke. "Daniel!" She shouted with joy, her voice clear, strong, and undeniable. The room erupted in gasps. Reporters dropped their pens, some clapped without even realizing. Mr. Blackwood's eyes filled with tears. He turned to the audience and declared, "This boy is proof that wealth does not create miracles, human kindness does. And today this company will change forever. From this day on, we will use our power not just for profit, but for people." The crowd didn't know how to react. But in that moment, Daniel squeezed Lily's hand, and she smiled brighter than she ever had. And for the first time, the billionaire CEO understood what it truly meant to be rich. The applause began slowly, a few scattered claps, then louder, stronger, until the hall thundered with standing ovation. But Daniel wasn't clapping. He was holding Lily's hand, looking lost in the sea of suits and flashing cameras. His clothes were worn, his shoes had holes, yet at that moment he was the most important person in the room. Mr. Blackwood walked down from the stage. Every step echoed with a weight of decision. When he reached Daniel, he knelt down. The billionaire once feared by all knelt before a poor boy. "Daniel," he said softly, voice breaking, "you've given me something I could never buy. You gave me my daughter's voice, my family's hope. And now I want to give you something in return." Daniel's father shifted uncomfortably. "We don't need charity, sir," he said firmly. But Mr. Blackwood shook his head. "This is not charity," he replied. "This is a partnership." The crowd held its breath. "What do you mean?" Daniel asked, confused. Mr. Blackwood stood tall again, turning to the audience. "From this day, Daniel will not just be my daughter's friend. He will be part of this family. His education, his future, his dreams, this company will stand behind them. He deserves the same chance as any child in this room." Reporters scribbled wildly. Some investors frowned, but most people, most human beings in that hall smiled through their tears. Daniel's father's eyes filled. He opened his mouth to protest, but then he saw his son standing beside Lily, her small hand clutching his, smiling brighter than he'd ever seen. For once, his heart told him, "Say yes." With trembling lips, he whispered, "Thank you." Mr. Blackwood nodded firmly, then looked back at the cameras. "And let this be our legacy. Not buildings, not numbers, but lives changed, voices found." The crowd erupted again. Reporters shouted questions, but all Daniel cared about was Lily, who leaned closer and whispered, just for him, "Thank you, Daniel." Her first real words to him. Her voice soft, fragile, but full of life. And in that moment, in front of the world, two children, one rich, one poor, proved that hope, kindness, and love could rewrite even the coldest story. The billionaire gained a family. The poor boy gained a future. And together they gained something money could never buy. A bond unbreakable. The end.